How much of who we become is really ours? How much is shaped by where we grow up, what's expected of us, and the rooms we learn to read? And what happens when fitting in starts to feel like losing something? Maybe identity isn't something we simply find. Maybe it's something we notice, question, and sometimes have to reclaim. Hi, welcome to What's the Point? I'm Bill Ellis, your host. Each week I talk with people about the moments that shape them, the choices that change them, and what those stories might spark in you. And with that said, let's get into today's conversation. My guest today is Femi Corazon. Femi is a senior creative leader whose career has moved across advertising, technology, storytelling, and behavior change. She began at BBDO in New York and has since worked across organizations including Rescue Agency, NBC Universal, and Little Dot Studios. Her work focuses on how people connect, respond, and change, but her own story also raises bigger questions about identity, creativity, adaptation, and leadership. Today we're going to talk about what shapes us, what changes us, and how we hold on to ourselves as our lives and careers evolve. Femi, welcome.
Hello, Bill. I'm so glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, absolutely. You've got such an interesting and diverse background, and it's always an interesting thought as to where to start. So in this case, let's start a little bit with your career. Before we get to your career, actually, let's do this. Let's start where life began for you. Tell us a little bit about the background of Femi.
Gosh, where life began. That's such a big question, Bill. Life began in Iowa. I mean, when you say it like that, you actually don't get the big picture. I was born in Iowa City, but I was born to international students. So my mom at the time was studying at Iowa State University, but I was born in the University of Iowa. She's a Filipino woman, and my father is a Nigerian man. So very shortly thereafter, I moved to Manila with my mom, and then shortly after that, moved to Nigeria and lived there for several years. So my formative years were both in the Philippines and in Nigeria, and I didn't move back to the States and back to Iowa till I was a teenager and in high school. So that was quite a culture shock and quite a shift, but really formed the basis of everything that I am today.
No doubt. So going from Ames, Iowa, to the Philippines to Nigeria isn't a real common path. You might be unique
Really?
in that regard, but then getting back to Ames makes it that much more unique. Tell me, what was it like growing up across those different places and the different cultures?
You know, I think I've thought a lot about that because I've had to answer that question a lot. And I think there's always been a sense of not belonging for me. And being in the Philippines, brown, I'm a brown skinned girl. I'm a Black woman and not truly belonging there. But then going to Nigeria and not truly belonging there because I'm biracial, and coming to the United States and not really belonging here either because really I'm from immigrant parents. It speaks to how you figure out integration into the environment that you're in. And I think that's really important now in a world that's really multicultural, and thinking through what actually helps us connect with other people. And I spent a lot of time in my life figuring that out, right? Not really knowing that that's what you're doing, right? You're in these environments without necessarily choosing them, but it becomes a matter of survival. It becomes a matter of survival to integrate into a community and to understand what makes people tick, what makes people accept you, what makes you fit in, and what makes you be able to have an impact in that community and to contribute in a meaningful way. So I think the core of all of that, the core piece of that, and I think the main takeaway for me has been that moving through these cultures has really been an important piece in where I've ended up in my career now, because I have spent my entire life learning about people.
Yeah. And let me just get some clarification on something you said earlier. I'm going to tell you what my take on it is, on something you said, and then you can let me know if I'm on target or if I'm off base. But you said you were in the Philippines and you didn't belong there. You were in Nigeria and you didn't belong there. And you're in the Ames, Iowa, the U.S., and you didn't belong there. My take on that is that's a feeling that you felt you didn't belong, because as I see it, you 100% belong in all of those places, and you have every rationale, justification, and right to have been there. So I just tell me if you're seeing that differently, because I don't want anyone to take the idea that you didn't belong here, go back to where you came from type of an attitude.
You know, I love that you're calling that out. The world is a very interesting place, and I actually so let me start with table stakes here. I love being Filipino and Nigerian, but it is important to acknowledge that you don't automatically get an open door in many cultures. I don't want to stereotype, but I think it is important for us to talk a little bit about what you just said, because I grew up walking the streets of Manila being called negra, which is black. That's clearly you don't belong here. But no one was saying go back home. Nobody's saying go back to where you belong. That there's a difference. There's a distinction between being called out for being different and being rejected. That's not what was happening.
Right.
I wasn't being rejected. I was very much embraced by my family, but I was acutely aware that I didn't look like my cousins. And I didn't look like the people on the street.
Right.
And so were others. Everyone else was aware I didn't look like that. And my mother, bless her heart, I didn't understand, because at that point, my parents split up right when I was born. So I actually didn't know my father right away. And then through the magic of romantic love letters, they got back together. So, but the truth is, for the first few years of my life, I did not know my dad. So my reference to other people that looked like me were people on television. I did not see black people, yet everyone saw me and made sure that I was aware that I was black. And so that was very, very much a part of my childhood, that, being called negra and asking my mom, why are they saying that to me? And my mom's like, well, you were born with a little chocolate in your mix. And that made it okay. And I became so confident in that. And that, again, so many kudos to my mother for making sure I never had any kind of feeling of stigma around that. But then when I moved to Nigeria, the opposite happened. With, again, a really interesting thing there is, my father is Yoruba. So Yoruba culture, there is a word, Oyibo, which means white. My mom's not white. And I'm certainly not white, but it also began to take on this meaning in culture of foreigner.
Okay.
And so again, there is this, in fact, I still remember it because this is how often I heard it. Can I sing?
Please.
First of all, let me warn your audience that I'm a horrible singer.
Oh, stop.
So I'm just going to sort of chant. But there's a chant, and it would follow me around, and my mom, and it is Oyibo pepe. If you eat pepe, you go yellow momo. That means foreigner. If you eat hot pepper, your foreignness becomes more obvious. You become more light, more different. It's and that was that's in Pidgin English. And I grew up hearing that, when we went to the market, when you walk around. And again, very much an emphasis in the difference, but not a rejection. I think that's so, so important that we call that out, because I never felt rejected by these cultures. These were cultures that made it clear you're not really like us, which meant that I had a little bit of a task, so to speak, to prove in some way that I belonged. At least that's what I thought when I was younger.
Interesting. So there's a couple of dynamics going on here. The mixed race and the three different countries before you're in your teens, which means three different cultures, which means three different situations, going from negra to
Weibo.
center.
Weibo. Yes. Yes.
But you also had what some people would refer to as a broken family. I would just refer to it as separated parents, which is a whole different dynamic. So you put all of that together, and I'd like to hear if one of those scenarios had more of an impact than the other, but combined in your life and your childhood, did everything you were going through make you feel more adaptable, or did it make you feel that it was harder for you to know where you belonged, quote, air quotes on belonged?
Wow, that's a fascinating question, Bill. You ask really good ones. I've never had to answer that question. I don't think I ever thought my family was broken, right? Or separated even. I was aware that my father lived in another country, and I didn't really know what he looked like for a while. I just knew that he was brown. And I think I was so much more focused on understanding and surviving the story I was living in, right? The family that was in front of me. Because the thing about that, in terms of impact on growing up, impact on who you become, the key thing here is my family was incredibly loving. My grandmother was, she was essentially a second mother. I was so loved by my family. I never felt out of place. So that's the interesting thing of saying I didn't really belong, because that was called out in the streets and anywhere I went. But I very much belonged in my family, and that was never a question.
Quick
That's also
clarification,
true in
if I may.
Nigeria.
Sorry.
Say that again?
Quick clarification. Sorry to interrupt. Was it your paternal or your maternal grandmother that you talked about being like a second mother, the Filipino?
Maternal. Yeah, my Filipino, my mom's mom. My mother was actually left me with my family. So I lived in a multi-generational household because my mom was teaching at University of Philippines. So she actually would leave me with my grandmother and my cousins and my uncles. And I was living with my grandmother while my mom went off to teach. And she'd be gone for the whole week and then not come back till the weekend.
And the reason I asked that, and again, apologies for having interrupted your thought, but the reason I asked that is in many cultures, and I'm not as familiar with it in the Filipino world, but definitely throughout Africa, the grandmother has an incredibly important, significant role in the family. So I was just wondering if that extended to the Philippines, and clearly it did.
Yes, that's also true. You're absolutely right. The Philippines, very much. I mean, the multi-generational nature of households is incredibly important there as well. And I never met my paternal grandmother and grandfather because they passed away before I was born. But definitely, I never felt rejected or disowned or anything like that by my Filipino family. And it was really a question of evolving myself and my identity to meet the environment that I was in. I think that's really what it became for me. So I spoke Tagalog in Manila, and then when I moved to Nigeria, I didn't speak English, and I had to speak to my father, and I had to learn English so I could go to school. So that, so you're suddenly presented with a whole other challenge of, okay, I'm 5 years old and I don't know what anybody's saying to me. And I have to go to school, and I have to communicate with my father, and I have to communicate so I can make new friends, and I have to understand why I'm being treated again here like I'm different. Treated like you're different, again, treated differently but not rejected is very, very much a constant in my life. And then meeting other biracial kids and really finding community there as well in Nigeria.
Okay. I love where you just a moment ago referenced where you met the situation. What a great phrase. It's kind of like, hi, I'm Femi. Glad to meet you because I have no other choice. Let's get along. And that's to me, it's a subtle word, but it really impacted me when I heard you say that. So multi-generation, separated, not broken parents, 3 countries before you're 5 or 6. Is that all kind of together what drives your creativity? Because let's face it, at the end of the day, you are a creative type person. When did you start to realize that was one of your traits?
You said something about, hi, hi, here I am. And I'm here even though I didn't really choose to be here.
Uh-huh.
I think that's core to answering the question you just asked. Because you said, if I may reflect this back to you, you asked, at what point did I realize I was creative? I don't know that you realized you're creative. You are creative. And I think I began to realize it was something that was really important to my survival. I lived in story. I had so many imaginary friends. I was just in my head all the time. I loved reading. I sought out stories written by other people. I made up stories. I made up imaginary scenes with my imaginary friends. And I think the idea of not choosing the situation you're in becomes really important when you think about story and how you might find yourself living a story that you inherited.
Mm-hmm.
I inherited being from an immigrant family. I was born into a situation that obviously I didn't choose, and nothing wrong with that. But how do you adapt, and how do you move into what you want to become, whether it's part of a community or something else? And I think that's important, because when I go back to your question around when did I realize that I was a creative, I realized that understanding story, whether it's a story in front of me, the story I'm living, the story I'm in, became important for me to survive. Story as survival, story as a mechanism for growth, story as a mechanism for communication. Story is everything, and it has been incredibly instrumental in how I've moved through all of these situations.
Very interesting. So a lot of your, I'm going to say professional life, but a lot of your life is right now based in and around and on creativity and storytelling and everything you just said. That's not necessarily where your professional career started. So you took a little bit of a circuitous route to where you are now. Tell us about that. What were the early days, the early efforts in professional life, working life, and being on your own?
Mm-hmm. Speaking of story, gosh, right? When you are a Nigerian, you do not tell your parents, or at least you don't get away with telling your parents you want to be an actress. And my father was very insistent that I become one of 3 things: a scientist, an engineer, or a doctor. That was it. Those were my options. You're going to be one of those 3 things. But I wanted to be in advertising. I love commercials. And then somewhere along the way, I morphed from wanting to be in advertising to wanting to be an actress. But none of that was on the table at the time. I had to be one of these other 3 things. So my parents, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for me, my parents unfortunately got divorced, and I moved back to Iowa, and my mom had a different set of rules. My mother's rules were, I don't care what you study as long as it gets you a job that pays your bills. And in her mind, acting was not that right at school. So you got to study something else, and then you can do whatever you want. So I said, okay, cool. I'll go be a journalist. So I studied journalism, mass communication with an emphasis in advertising, so that I could understand how to basically tell story, but shift it into copywriting and that sort of thing. And but all along the way, I was actually studying. I was on stage at Iowa State University. I was in plays and learning how to be a performer, and really loved that. And at the end, when I graduated, I my mother was like, okay, great. What are you going to do? And I was like, I want to go to New York. I want to be an actress. And she said, okay, well, you met the deal. Here's my credit card. And, we didn't have a lot of money. So her giving me my credit card was just an incredibly precious signal in her belief in me. Because, she knew I wasn't going to just willy-nilly spend it on whatever. But it was a little bit of insurance that I'd be okay. But I took off and went to New York City to be an actress, and realized very quickly that to be a successful actor in New York City really meant, at least in my mind at the time, that I needed to be on Broadway. Well, Bill, I don't sing or dance, so duh.
Well, you just sang lovely a moment ago, so it sounded like it made me feel as though I was on Broadway.
Oh gosh, no. I'm sure every casting director in New York City who cast for Broadway would be like, next. So but while I was there, I worked, every actor at the beginning of their career is usually working a parallel path.
Yeah.
And, the other thing that I actually loved to do is I loved to tinker with code. So I started working at an ad agency and
Computer code.
Yes, at BBDO New York. And so while I was, out there auditioning, trying to get into commercials and other things, I was also coding and building internal software systems for BBDO New York that connected to their financial database, that I was able to, start really understanding how people interacted with software. And that was an interesting journey, because that's where you also start to see how user behavior is influenced by the experience that they're living in their screens, right? And how I could influence that, how I could even influence adoption just by the way I talked about it. And that's when I began to understand the power of getting people excited to try something, because walking into a room full of accountants and saying, well, I got this new software that's going to help you do this XYZ is very different than, I heard that y'all were having this really difficult time, generating and understanding this data in this way. And I'm here to build something really unique and special for you that, helps you accomplish more and give you more time back in your day and really make this feel valuable to them. So even in that sort of framing, I started to learn that it was really important to walk into a room with a narrative that would begin to help people be willing to take that first step to change, to accept change. And, even applying that to myself and realizing that, Bill, I had never coded professionally. And suddenly here I am at BBDO New York, and they're offering to pay me to code professionally. And, in between meetings, I was running over to the bookstore in the corner, desperately looking for code books that would help me with code. Right. And, because I didn't really know everything. Gosh, I hope nobody can take back your paycheck from years ago. But yeah, I certainly was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And, over my lunch would be studying up on how I actually build something, even though I'd said I could do it. So believing I could was the first step in being able to do it. Believing that I could convince people that what I was going to make for them was actually going to help them was also really important. So again, as acting, took on more importance in my life, I continued with coding and building software, and really shifted into creative consulting, building websites, things like that. And over time, all of this stuff came together because I really became very multi-hyphenate creative, because I'm touching code, I'm touching design, I'm touching writing, I'm talking about marketing and strategy, and also really rooted and steeped in performance and connecting with people in that way. So I am now sitting in a role that allows me to bring all these things together. in a way that really feels meaningful for the work.
There's so much that I can take from everything you just said. I've heard many people say that if you're looking to hire someone, hire the person with the right characteristics, traits, behavior, and attitude, and you can teach them the function of the job. Clearly, you were doing it at a more than satisfactory level because they didn't fire you. And a company like BBDO would if it was messing things up, no doubt about that. But where you started from was a basis, Femi, as I hear what you said, to feed back to you, a basis of interest and commitment and doing the best you can, not by faking it till you make it, but by learning as you make it. And I think that's a big difference that myself and hopefully the listeners can take in. Fake it till you make it. It's a nice phrase, but faking it rarely is a good long-term strategy. More importantly than that, though, what you ended up honing, the skills you ended up honing, have gotten you where you are today, and it has nothing to do with coding, like you said. What you realized early on is, for anything I do to be successful, other than studying at lunchtime with the zeros and the ones, people have to buy into it. So you started looking at human behavior, and you started looking at change and how to manage that necessary feature. How did that? It sounds simple. Just change people, but it's not simple. Expand on that a little bit, please, about how your work in the BBDO T area helped set you up to learn and to gain great experience and knowledge and success in behavioral change and understanding people.
Because I didn't know how to step into a situation with software and just build it, which is what a lot of developers were doing, I started with the people. I started with a curiosity about what the pain points were. It was design thinking before I knew what that was, right? So I would sit with people and go, what are you trying to do? And where are you running into problems? And what are your pain points? Again, not using exactly that terminology, but really being curious about how I could solve their problem made it so much easier to come back with a solution that was already rooted in a narrative that they would accept, right? And that becomes really useful when you're thinking about behavior change, because you have to start with, what is the behavior trying to change? Or, in the instance of my work at BBDO, it was, what's the pain point? But if you fast forward many, many years to now, I'm working in behavior change and weaving narratives that help people choose differently, choose different behaviors. It goes back to, well, why are you doing this thing that's unhealthy for you, right? And I think that's really important context, because we're quick to treat pain points as negative data. We're quick to treat bad behavior as negative data. Or when I say bad behavior, I mean behavior that hurts you. All those have some commonalities when you think about it from the perspective of utility. Pain points are useful data. Unhealthy behaviors are useful data in terms of how you need to address it from a storytelling perspective. Because I can't tell you a story that helps you see a different possibility if I don't first understand where you are now and what that story you're living in is. And I'm going to leave the world of user experience design and move just right into behavior change here, because I think it will just help clarify the points a little bit more. And that is, when you think about unhealthy behavior or behavior that needs to change in some fashion, people tend to skip over the idea that it's actually important to understand the why of that negative behavior, of that bad behavior. And generally speaking, that story, the behavior is rooted in some sort of story that this person has now told themselves is true about themselves. And it's really familiar. it's really comfortable. I'm really comfortable not going to the gym.
Uh-huh.
I don't like the gym. There's a lot of gym bros. It smells bad. I don't like to work out. I'm not a working out type of person. I don't want big muscles. Then it's like, okay, well, okay, so all of those things might be true in my head, but now if my job is to convince you to go to the gym, I've got to understand that so that I can start to get underneath the reasons that you don't go, so that I can start
Right.
to explore how I could move you to one step. Well, you don't have to go to the gym.
Yeah.
You can go right outside,
Yeah.
just take a walk, right?
Yeah, so you're touching on, you segued into my notes. I don't know how you're reading them, but thank you for a brilliant segue. Yeah, I did want to focus a good bit more on behavioral change, because that's what I think all of us, if we're honest with ourselves and open to it, we can all have behavioral change that will make things better for us. But let's get right down to the very nuts and bolts of this. In your experience, what actually makes people change? Or motivates
Gosh,
them to change? Either way.
you they have my perspective is very much rooted in narrative and story, so I'll frame it that way. I think what makes people change is an understanding that the story that they are living in no longer suits them. It is not necessarily aligned with the story they want to be in. So if someone wants to be healthy, they have to accept that where they are now is not healthy. So you've got to, the job of narrative is to move a person from, you're not in a healthy story, you're not in a healthy place, to you can be healthy. So my job in storytelling is to convince and help make possible this new version that you aspire to be.
So when you're having that narrative, Femi, and people are rooted in whatever that behavior may be, and I'm not going to say it's bad or horrible, but it's behavior that they can benefit if they change. I'll put it that way. So whether it's being sedentary on the couch, whether it's being addicted to alcohol or drugs, whether it be any number of things, when people hear a narrative of it could be different, what is it they either misunderstand about that or reject about that or are unable to take in? Because I work with a lot of people in that situation, in those situations. And the belief, this self-delusion that what I'm doing is perfectly fine and change won't help anything. Oftentimes I just look at them and they say, well, I'm doing this, and I just go, how's that working for you? Kind of step back and take a look. But how do you help people to get over that misunderstanding, that mistrust, or that flat out rejection that there's a better way?
First, you have to realize that the story that they're living in is useful in some way to them.
Uh-huh.
Period.
Good point.
Because there can be a lot of shame around that, and accepting that story that they're living in has kept them safe.
Uh-huh.
So you've got to make it emotionally survivable to move to something different. Now that sounds so complicated, right? Like, well, what is that? It's around meaning and making meaning around, okay, the thing that the story you're in now, the life you're living now, you can retain the things that are important to you. Who you are doesn't need to change. What matters to you does, though,
Uh-huh.
right? So if you understand what matters to a person, you have to make it available to them. You have to show them they're not necessarily, because you talked about rejecting something immediately. That rejection is data, right?
Uh-huh.
That's information. Because the question now is, why are they rejecting it? Why are they rejecting that idea? It's because it doesn't feel safe.
Right.
People want to be safe. The brain wants you to be safe. Like we are wired as human beings. I mean, obviously there are some people who love to take risks, but most people are very comfortable and want to be comfortable in safety, right? And so if you challenge that feeling of safety, you're not going to motivate change. And yet most of us also know that everything you want is on the other side of that fear, right? That's such a cliche, but it's really true. And how do you connect meaning to that? And meaning is really the root. So I think that's the answer, right,
Yeah.
Bill? It's how do you make meaning for a person so that they feel emotionally safe to take that step. And it could be a little step. It doesn't need to feel so big.
At the risk of being self-serving, but I'm very happy to do so, I hear you saying we have to get people to the point of them understanding the reason for change and what's the point. What's the point to them? What's the benefit? Because as humans, we do want to be safe. And as humans, we are programmed to be efficient. Oftentimes that looks like lazy. Efficient, if we can do something an easy way, our body and our brain says, great. You did talk about people that are really risk takers, and that's a whole nother area that I don't think we should necessarily, if you'll pardon the pun, jump into right now. But that's a whole different data point where people want to continually take risk and avoid that feeling of safe. So, I mean, I think there's something there as well. And I bring that up just to say that all of our behavior, all of our do's and don'ts, all of our actions and lack of actions are all data points. And so that ties back very cleanly to me with you being in the IT department trying to get all this data into something meaningful. Now, when you were there, suddenly you started to advance into a leadership position. And that's continued beyond BBDO. That's been your career up till now and beyond. But did that leadership feel like the next step, or was it one of those things where it kind of just changed your relationship with the work, where you were more hands-on with the work than leading other people in the work?
Leadership happened, I would say it happened by accident. I didn't set out to be a leader.
Okay.
But I'm a little bit bossy and very opinionated. And, even I end up getting put into positions of leadership because I usually have very emphatic opinions about something, not necessarily how it should be done, but why it should be done, right? And the why is very convincing for most people. And I want to go back to that why is usually connected to meaning, right? What is that, quote, hidden agenda? There's a book by Kevin Allen that talks about the hidden agenda. It's really about pitching. And, as a creative director, I've done quite a few pitches, but it really gets me thinking, when you think, again, hidden agenda, meaning, making meaning for people, why would people move from one step to another? It really, you get down to the why. Why does this matter? And in almost every role I've been in, I end up some situation where I'm like, this is not making sense and this is why we should change it. What's been really helpful for me has been the ability to pitch and to pitch the idea. And really that's industry speak for being able to tell stories. Here's why it matters. Here's what the outcome could be. Here's how it affects people. Here's how it would personally impact you. Here are all the things that would be amazing about this, if you imagine a future where this is actually in place. And it's incredibly powerful to be able to make meaning for people. Meaning, I think, as human beings is something that we're constantly seeking. I still seek it every day. I think we wake up in the morning and meaning and purpose are really intertwined. Like, what are we trying to do with our lives on a day-to-day basis? What is leadership about? Why do you lead? What's the point really about any of it?
Yeah.
And meaning is what makes people move. Meaning is what makes human beings move. That's been core to my leadership. And I landed here purely by accident. I didn't seek it out. I think organically, as you get more mature in your career, you end up getting put into leadership positions. And I continue to hold on to meaning, attaching that to values and purpose, because that is how you motivate teams, how you actually make change in organizations, is when people understand the why and the who for.
That's very interesting. A recent guest, Andy Simon, who's a corporate anthropologist, stated several times that as humans, we are meaning makers, and we have to make meaning. And that just ties directly with what you're saying in your experience. A couple of things. I want to come back to pitching, so don't let me forget to come back to pitching, because I've got an experience from my past life. But I've heard you talk about not losing yourself in leadership. When did that become something that you had to think about, or do you not think about it, but you're just aware of it?
Yeah, I've, being the kind of leader that actually wants people to be happy and my teams to be happy, I've found that my journey as a leader has really been one where I've learned a lot about boundaries, right? And I see that now in a lot of younger managers or new managers who really want to do right by their teams. And it's so important for strong leadership and really empathetic leadership to understand that you cannot become a container for all of the emotions of your team. And you cannot, leadership does not mean does not have to mean sacrificing yourself for your team. It means shepherding your team. It means making sure that they are in an environment that supports them with systems, that they feel psychologically safe, that they can, do their best work in a way that that is clear and clearly directed. I think is really, providing that clarity for them. But you do not have to, as a leader, dive wholesale into the idea that, well, I'm going to sacrifice myself for my teams, because I do see people doing that, and it's a sure way to burn out.
Well, that's tremendous advice, and advice that I truly wish I had heard in the Wayback Time Machine, because a lot of what you just talked about, those are critical leadership skills that, frankly, I had not honed. I would say I hadn't knocked off the rough edges. I didn't even have the edges to start with. So that's brilliant insight for anyone on here who is currently a leader, striving to be a leader, whether you want to be a leader or not. Take notes on that last part that Femi just took us through. Let me get back to the pitching, because I spent a lot of my life professionally with Anheuser-Busch in the marketing group, and specifically in brand management. So we were very often pitched television ads, outdoor, any form of advertising or sales promotion, where our agency would have meetings, say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. And then they would bring in saying, we think this will do it, and here's choice A, choice B, and choice C. Some of them went all the way to choice ML or LMNOQ. But what I heard from several people after I got to know them more, and this was on a personal basis as opposed to a professional basis, they said, Bill, we have learned that when we're pitching, we have to have at least one that we know for a fact is a rejected concept. Because people feel like they're more in control if they have something to reject, which I thought was kind of a waste of time. But then it really made sense, because for reasons that I don't fully understand. But what are your insights on that? Because you know human behavior, you know change, and you've done enough pitches in the creative world. You have to have some thoughts on that.
Well, that's really, I think that's very much, it's a pragmatic way to walk into a room and allow a client to feel empowered, right? That's really very practical. It's like, look, we want you to feel like you are part of this process, right? We want you to feel like you had a say in this. And so always bringing in more. I don't know that necessarily has to be one that you know for sure is rejected, because that's a different type of psychology, because that also falls into that whole around that psychology of pricing, where you start with the highest price when people would never ever pay that, and then you show them the middle range and then the low, and then the low just must be something wrong with that if it's that cheap, so people go for that middle range, but you always knew that was what you were going to sell. that's a pricing strategy as well, right? And so the strategy around pitching and walking in with more than one thing so that the client feels like they are part of the process is, to me, just good business.
Yeah. And maybe I was a little bit harsh in my description of that. Maybe a better way to have described it is having a range of potential answers, knowing full well that the one you think is maybe the worst, if some of them are going to get rejected, I guess. So not necessarily bring one in that will get rejected, although there were plenty.
Always.
And they had to have known they were going to get rejected. I was presented, a little sidebar, I was presented a creative solution to something we were trying to do at one point, and the creative team gave an eloquent direct sales pitch as to why it would work. And I said, oh, it's beautiful, it's great, this strategy's fine, I've got a question for you. And they said, what's that? I said, where's my product in this? They'd kind of forgotten that. They kind of forgot the reason. Anyway, that's just a little memory.
Way off brief on that one.
Yeah.
Right?
Is there a lesson, Femi, from your life or career that you become more valuable over time?
You know, I think one of the most important takeaways when we think about behavior and people is information is not enough. Information alone is not enough. People do not change because they received information, right? I think that that's really, really crucial. People change because identity that they are envisioning, this new way of being, feels survivable, feels safe, feels welcoming. So our job, if we want to change behavior, our job is to make people, help people attach meaning to this new way of living so that it feels doable to them. Because again, meaning and purpose are not really rooted in information. It's rooted in emotion. And so you've got to help people feel safe to take that step. So I think that's an important segue into the larger picture, which I do love to share with my mentees. And that is, strategy and all these things that we think about when we think about a career or a business or whatever. All those things are good and true and sure, fine, do that. But the very first step is the story. Can you actually see this thing? And this is not about, I'm not really talking about woo-woo manifestation. I'm talking about the building blocks of understanding what's possible for you. If you can't believe it or if you can't see it, it's going to be really hard to get there. And so the very first step is, what is that story that I want to be living in? What does that look like if I could be whatever I want? What does it look like if I'm living my purpose? Because once you can materialize that in your brain wants to make that true.
No.
And then you build the strategy from there. And then you build, you figure out your steps. Do you have to go back to school? Do I have to go learn something? What do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? But if you can't even imagine it, if you don't see yourself in that, then it becomes pretty hard to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to get to a place that we can't envision.
Yeah.
What do you hope that people might recognize or relate to in your story? What would be your ideal item for one of the listeners here today to take that they can relate to from your story?
It's important to stay curious and to seek out learning, not to be afraid of it. Almost every single time I've made a change, I truly didn't always know what I was doing. You got to go do it before you feel ready. You just do. You have to be willing and able to step into something that might feel very unfamiliar, because the job then becomes about learning how to do that. And so many people don't take that step because they're so afraid to fail. And it keeps you stuck.
Good answer, good insight. 2 more questions, and I'm cheating a little bit because the first one's going to be a combination.
Okay, so 3.
Just to reiterate, born in Iowa, moved to the Philippines, lived in Nigeria, lived in New York City. You've got a lot of experience geographically. You've got a lot of experience life-wise and interacting with people. What worries you most about the world right now? And counterpoint, what gives you hope?
You know, I am very worried that we are losing touch with the idea of diversity, multiculturalism, that we are all different but the same. We all want the same things. We all love the same way. We have husbands, wives, children, partners. Love is love. Families are family. And we're losing that in part because we're now literally pushing artificial human beings out onto our schoolings, right? And so now we don't even know what's real.
Yeah.
So I'm worried that humanity is starting to lose touch with humanity in some ways.
Okay.
And reminding ourselves of that is going to be really important, that humanity is human for all of the things that make us human. We're deeply flawed, but we're so messy, but we're human. And what gives me hope is exactly that we are deeply flawed and we're so messy and we're so human, and we will find connection. We are driven by the search for meaning, and we will continue to drive for that meaning and connection. And I'm really hopeful that those things will rise to the top eventually, because right now we're so buried by technology and all these fancy new shiny things. And I have to believe in the power of humanity to take care of itself and reach back and connect with each other.
Brilliant. Well, it feels like a really good place to kind of step back for a moment, take a little bit of a breath. Because underneath it all, I think that identity seems to be less about having a fixed answer and more about paying attention and being observant. And being observant to what changed us, what parts of ourselves we still want to keep. And that brings us to the question that ends every one of my episodes. And that's in the context of your life, our discussion, and whatever you want to frame it as. Femi Corazon, what's the point?
The point is thinking deeply about whether the story you're in right now is just there for protection, or is it really moving you somewhere different? So the question is really about, is this story still protecting me, or is it preventing me from becoming who I'm supposed to be?
Great answer. Thank you for your time and for your insight. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your perspective that you brought to this conversation. And listeners, we hope this episode leaves you thinking about the versions of yourself that you've carried through life and which ones still feel true. Femi Corazon, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, thanks for listening to What's the Point? If this conversation meant something to you, we hope you'll follow the show and share it with someone who might benefit from it. And if you know a guest with a story worth exploring, send me a message, bill@billellis.com. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts on the show, and I'll see you next time.